The Best Way to Explain It, Episode 18. Hello everyone, another episode of The Best Way to Explain It, the podcast that's about as pointless as a miniature cupcake. I mean, think about it. It's already a mini cake. Why does it need to be smaller? It's already small. Like, that's kind of the whole point of a cupcake. It doesn't need to be any smaller. You're just depriving me of my rightful cake, and it bugs me just a little bit, in case you didn't notice. All right, yeah. So, yeah, miniature cupcakes, gross. But if you've noticed at this point, there's a decided lack of snark on the other end, and that's because Breckan is actually sick. He texted me. We were supposed to record, I believe, on Sunday before our Monday show, which is why we didn't have a Monday show. Apologize about that. But I did tweet out about it, so if you don't follow me on Twitter and you want show updates, you can follow me at ScottOlson25, and that will get you all of the latest and greatest show updates. But yeah, so Breckan is sick. He texted me and said he, went to the hospital for a little bit. And yeah, that was the last thing I heard from him, so I really hope he's not dead. So, Breckan, if you're listening to this, I would really love some confirmation that, you're still alive and live and kicking, because I'm not sure if I can do this without you. So, there's that. But yeah, I thought I'd go ahead and record another podcast while he is on the mend, and hopefully he can join us for the next episode. And so this is coming out on the 16th, I believe. That's the Friday I'm thinking of. It is, no, this is coming out on the 15th, so that means Saturday would be the 16th. So if you've been keeping up, we're coming to the end of the giveaway. So I do want to emphasize the giveaway closes on the 17th. That's the last possible day you can enter your reviews. So we'll probably record on Sunday, so chances are that we're going to announce the winners on I believe the 18th, which is that following Monday. So next Monday, we're going to be announcing the winners for the Amazon Echo. So if you guys don't remember, you can enter the giveaway by leaving a rating and review on iTunes, screenshotting it, and then sending it to me at scott@thebestwaytoexplainit.com. So if you do that, you will be entered to win an Amazon Echo, which we'll be announcing who wins on Monday. Yeah, so be looking forward to that, and make sure to do that because we are cutting it off then. So if you're ever going to leave a review for this show, now would be the time to do it. And if you weren't planning on leaving a review for this show, I do ask you to reconsider, because there's literally no reason not to. So yeah, so that's what's going on. Also, if you guys don't follow us on Facebook, you can like our page, which is just The Best Way to Explain It. If you go to Facebook, you can look at that. It's also linked on our website. And if you want, you can subscribe to us on YouTube, which is, again, just The Best Way to Explain It YouTube channel. And we have some software that converts these into video format, and you can listen there. And so, yeah, without further ado, if you've looked at the title of this current episode, we're going to be talking about Bitcoin. This is a topic that I've done some research on. I wrote a research paper in one of my classes for college about the blockchain technology that kind of underlies it. And so I thought it'd be good, because especially considering the recent kind of meteoric rise of Bitcoin in terms of its value, I've seen a lot of misconceptions about what Bitcoin actually is or how it works. And actually, a lot of people have blatantly stated that they have no idea what it is or no idea how it works. So I thought, since I'd done some research, I could be of service. So the topic of Bitcoin really has two different parts to it. So there's the technology behind it and the economics of the currency itself. Now I'm going to go over both of these parts kind of interspersed throughout, but I'm going to focus primarily on the technology because I'm a bit more researched on that part than I am on the actual economics behind it. I can give you kind of a base idea behind how it's supposed to work, but I can't give you much in terms of investing advice or anything like that. So with that being said, what is Bitcoin? Well, Bitcoin is what's known as a cryptocurrency, it's just a form of currency that's entirely electronic. That's probably the most simple way to to sum it up. So it's not backed by anything physical. It's just backed up by what's known as the Bitcoin protocol, right? So this technically makes it what's called a fiat currency, since fiat currencies are currencies that don't have any commodities or assets that back up the currency, such as like gold or silver or any precious metals that we used to have back when the US dollar was on the gold standard, so the US dollar is also a fiat currency at this point because it doesn't need to be backed by anything besides the full faith and trust of the US government, whatever that's worth. So according to Bitcoin's official website, it says Bitcoin uses peer-to-peer technology to operate with no central authority managing transactions, and the issuing of Bitcoins is carried out collectively by the network. So basically what this means is that Bitcoin relies on the trust that people have that someone else will recognize the value given to Bitcoin. So this theme of trust is crucial to our understanding of how Bitcoin works in the technological sense. But also in the economic sense, as we'll get into it a little bit. So you're probably thinking, wait, how the heck is this supposed to work? We're supposed to just trust people to give it value? Well, it actually isn't unlike the system of money that we have now. Now, I think this idea is best understood if we know why we have currency in the first place. So to do this, I'm going to start with a story, all right? So let's suppose that there's a guy named Frank who has a bunch of llamas that he is feeding and taking care of. Now, Frank loves these llamas, and he wants to really provide for them. They're like his own kid. But he also has another kid who has been begging him for a new Frisbee. So he lost his Frisbee. Oh, come on, Frank. But, okay, let's suppose Frank also has a neighbor. So let's say this neighbor's name is Carol, and she happens to make Frisbees for a living. So then Frank is going to walk over to Carol and say, hey, you make Frisbees. My kid's been nagging me constantly for a new Frisbee, and I was wondering if you'd like to trade me for one of your Frisbees. And Carol would then say to Frank, okay, Frank, what do you have to trade me? Frank is going to reply, well, Carol, I happen to own many llamas. Would you like a llama? Now, Carol, being a normal human being with no real need for a llama, naturally replies, actually, I have no need for a llama, and if that's all you have to trade, then I can't trade you one of my crisp new Frisbees. What I really need is some new floss picks. Well, hang on. This is a big problem. Obviously, if Frank doesn't have something that Carol values more than the Frisbee, then there can't be a trade. I mean, why would Carol trade something away if the thing she is getting in return is less valuable to her? That doesn't make any sense unless she's forced to do it. So what does Frank do? Well, fortunately for him, his other neighbor, William, really wants a new llama and is willing to trade floss picks for one of Frank's llamas. So this is great fortune for Frank because that's exactly what Carol wants. So Frank and William trade these llamas for floss picks, and then Carol and Frank trade floss picks for a new Frisbee. Now everyone's happy and the world goes on, right? But I think you can see that this is actually a highly unlikely situation. Because chances are in the millions of transactions that happen every day, both parties are not going to have something that the other values more than what they currently have. So in order to cut out this middleman of William, we decided to create something that says, hey, I have this bauble. I'm just saying bauble to represent, currency. And this bauble is worth something to everyone else because everyone else can use this bauble to trade with other people. Now, this bauble I'm referring to, obviously, is currency. So you'll notice that this currency doesn't need to have any inherent value, if that's even really intelligible for non-human objects. Objects is the best word I could think of. So it only needs to have the value that other people give it because it'll be honored by those people as being worth something, right? So they value this bauble because they know if I have 8 baubles, I can get what I want because somebody else also desires these 8 baubles because they can use that to trade for something that they want. So, and that just kind of cuts out the middleman of William. So hopefully that makes sense. That's just called the subjective theory of value, if you want to look into more of that. So that's kind of what Bitcoin proposes to be. So it wants to be this bauble that can be used to exchange goods and services. So you're probably thinking, this just sounds like a different form of the dollars that I use when I swipe my debit card to make transactions. Well, you'd be right if Bitcoin used a bank. So Bitcoin is unique in that it eliminates the need for a trusted third party. So what the heck is a trusted third party, right? Well, in our money system right now, we have banks that keep track of our money and kind of act as this trusted third party. But with Bitcoin, there's no need for a bank So through its use of what's called blockchain technology, all exchanges like between two parties can be verified just between the two parties participating in the transaction. Sort of. That's sort of true. But just think of it like that. That's its goal. It's trying to eliminate that third party. So Bitcoin's unique contribution to the currency market is that it protects from the double spending problem. And it does this without the need of a trusted third party. Oh, excuse me. Taking a drink of water. I usually have Breckan to interject with his witty comments, but not today. Dang it, Breckan. Hope you're back soon. So, double spending problem. It solves it without a trusted third party. So, you're probably thinking, what's the double spending problem? Well, it's exactly what it sounds like, actually. It's the ability for one party to spend the same money more than once. So, I'll just throw out an example. So, suppose that I wanted to buy a bag of coffee beans from my favorite coffee shop, and I have 1 Bitcoin. Now, this money is obviously not physical, so when I purchase my bag of coffee beans using a Bitcoin, which makes it really good coffee apparently, because Bitcoin is super valuable right now, so I need to send my Bitcoin to the coffee shop online, right? Well, this process clearly is going to take some time. It's not going to happen instantly. There's no physical thing. It's just going to have this digital record, right? So then let's say the next door, there's a coffee shop whose coffee I've been really wanting to try, but I'm not sure if I'll like it. So I decide to walk over to that store, buy another bag of coffee using that same Bitcoin that I told the other coffee shop I was using to buy their coffee. Now, my account hasn't been updated with the lost Bitcoin yet, or the spent Bitcoin yet. So because the transaction hasn't processed yet for the first coffee shop, both shops are going to allow this transaction to go through. So to them, it looks legitimate. But obviously, that's a big problem because I've just gotten 2 Bitcoins worth of coffee for only 1 Bitcoin. So obviously, then I would skedaddle on out of there before anyone's the wiser. But here's the kicker. Whose Bitcoin is it? Well, is it the first coffee shop's or the second? We don't know. It'd probably be the first, but there's no way of telling who has the rightful claim to that Bitcoin. So that's kind of the double spending problem, being able to use the same money on more than one occasion. It doesn't have to be double, but that's just usually Occam's razor. Look it up. All right, so how do banks mitigate this problem? Well, they act as a trusted third party, which verifies both the amount of money that I have and the order in which I spent that money. So let's take a look at that same example using a bank, right? So again, I'm buying a bag of coffee beans, but this time I use my debit card to check out. So when I use my debit card, the bank gets notified that the $15 I want to spend ought to be given to this first coffee shop. So I get my bag of coffee, everything's fine, and then I'm going to walk over to the other shop and try to use that same $15 to buy another bag of coffee. Let's just assume $15 is all I have in my bank account. Not too far off. Just kidding. But only this time, the bank, which both the coffee shop and I trust, obviously, which makes it the trusted third party, is going to tell the second coffee shop that I've already spent that $15 elsewhere. And so the transaction is going to get denied, and I don't get to spend my money twice. So that's kind of how banks work in terms of having this trusted third party. So hopefully that clarifies the issue that just having an electronic currency on its own kind of presents, okay? So even if it was just dollars, it doesn't have to be Bitcoin, it could just be dollars, they would still face the same problem. But dollars have banks, right? So that's the middleman that Bitcoin's trying to get rid of. So Bitcoin's unique in that it solves this issue without the need for a bank or a trusted third party. So this is where blockchain comes in. So I'm not going to really go into the mathematical specifics, like with numbers and everything, of how blockchain works, but I'm going to explain kind of the general principles behind it and why it's secure, why it works. So here's kind of how Bitcoin works, hopefully with the idea of what the problems are that we're trying to solve. Because remember, whenever you're trying to figure out how technology works, look at what problem it's trying to solve. And so before I begin this, I'm going to take another drink of water. I'm sorry about that. All right. So Bitcoin, here's how it works. So each account or computer contains a list of everyone else's accounts along with that account's unspent inputs. That's what they're called in the Bitcoin world. So this just means that each computer knows how much money everyone else has. So they keep a copy of this financial ledger just like any other financial ledger. So your bank does this too. It's just in Bitcoin, every single other person that uses this currency keeps a record of what all the transactions are. Okay? So when Bob wants to pay Alice 3 Bitcoin, or BTC, if you ever see that abbreviation, that's just Bitcoin. So then Bob's going to broadcast a message to every single user's ledger to update his and Alice's account with these new values. So sounds easy enough, right? Well, it's just like a normal bank, like I said, except instead of the bank updating its ledger, everyone updates their ledgers, so no one person really has the final say on what the objective thing that happened, what the objective record is. So the problem with this system is that there isn't any way to verify that Bob is who he says he is, right? Like, why couldn't Alice just pretend to be Bob and tell everyone to update their ledgers with her having received the Bitcoin, right? So this problem's solved by what's called a digital signature. So a digital signature is just like a regular signature with your handwriting, like when you sign your checks to verify that you are who you say you are. Like the bank looks at your signature or your ID or whatever you use to identify yourself and say, yep, this is the person who owns this money, right? So you're you. So the difference is that a digital signature uses mathematical principles instead of, your handwriting. So when you create your Bitcoin account, you're going to be assigned a unique account number, and this number is actually what's stored on the ledger. So nobody really knows your name unless you want them to, so it'll have your account number and then how much Bitcoin you have, right? So this account number is then used to create what's known as a private key. So the private key is kept in your Bitcoin wallet. If you ever heard the term Bitcoin wallet, that's kind of what it's for. It's going to keep your private key safe. So whenever you want to send a transaction, you're going to use this private key in conjunction with the information stored in the transaction in order to create a unique digital signature to that transaction. Excuse me. So when every other computer receives this information, they're going to check that digital signature against your account number and then verify it using your public key. Okay, so everyone knows your public key, but only you know your private key. When I say key, it's a mathematical thing, okay? So you can think of it as like a physical key, but that's kind of what it means. So it can lock or unlock stuff using encryption. So if it checks out, then everyone knows that you are who you actually say you are, right? So since Alice doesn't know Bob's private key, presumably, she cannot send a transaction in Bob's name. And because this algorithm to create a digital signature uses the information in the transaction itself, the transaction can't be tampered with without everyone else figuring it out, because the digital signature would change. It would actually probably change quite a bit. Because that's kind of how the algorithms work. So as far as the specific mathematics go for this public-private key stuff, I'm not really going to go into it because it's pretty complex and be tough to talk about in the scope of this episode. It uses stuff like one-way functions, hashing, and all sorts of that good stuff. But just know that this type of public key cryptography, which is what it's called, it's used all the time on the internet. So you use it likely all the time, or stuff you use likely uses it. It's a secure way of encrypting and authenticating people. So if you're interested in learning how it works, you can either Google public key cryptography, RSA encryption, or you can send it in as a suggestion at thebestwaytoexplainit.com/suggestions, and I'd be happy to do an episode on it. Just know that this thing works and it's secure. It is, at least for now. I mean, if quantum computers ever get up and running consistently, then this whole thing comes tumbling down. So. All right. So now we know who sent the Bitcoin, but there's still a very important part that hasn't been verified. So it's the order in which transactions occur. So remember, this is extremely important for preventing the double spending problem, because with Bitcoin, a bank can't verify the order. That's kind of the whole point. Obviously, since transactions take place all over the world, different computers are going to be updated at different times. So this leads to some transactions that actually take place before others not being registered until after other transactions, just due to the distributed nature of the network. And so different computers might have transactions occurring in different orders around the world. So how do we know which computer has the right order, right? So that's the problem we're trying to solve. So this is where blockchain technology comes in. So up until this point, it's not really blockchain. It's just kind of the Bitcoin protocol in and of itself, and just conventional authentication on the internet with encryption. So that's all pretty standard stuff that a lot of websites use. But the unique thing that blockchain allows us to do is figure out which order the transactions ought to be ordered in. So let's take an example. So when a transaction happens, it's going to be sent to this new and pending transactions pool of transactions, right? So there's just a pool of new transactions. So these things have yet to be processed at this point. And each computer has its own version of the order of the transactions that have occurred up until this point. So that just means that each computer has its own idea of which order these transactions actually occurred. And it might be right, it might be the correct order, or it might not be. And so from this pool of new transactions, a new one's going to be selected to be put onto the end of the chain of transactions. So your computer's going to say, I think this one's the next one in the block of the chain of transactions. So technically, these transactions are grouped into blocks of transactions that occurred, and these transactions occurred roughly at the same time. So that's kind of where you get the name blockchain. So blocks of information ordered in a chain. But for simplicity's sake, we're just going to assume that there's only one transaction per block. So each computer is going to select which new transaction ought to be put onto the next chain, or onto the chain next, I guess would be the proper way of saying that. So which transaction actually occurred next? That's what they're going to that's what they're voting on, right? So in order to put a new transaction onto the chain, that computer has to solve a very difficult math problem using a hash of the most recent transaction on the chain. Okay, so hashing is just the information in the transaction, just using that information contained within a transaction in order to generate a value, right? So the information in the transaction would include stuff like account number, amount, and what time, and all of that's good stuff. And so those are all just numbers that can go into a mathematical function that generates kind of a random value. I mean, it's not random, but it appears that way. So what this means is that if there's different information put into the hash function, there's going to be a different result. So what this means is that each computer is going to have its own version of the blockchain. So that's just the chain of transactions that have occurred up until this point. So in order to add a new transaction onto the end, the computer needs to choose the transaction that they believe is next in the chain and use their current version of the chain to solve the hash, and then when they solve it, the newest transaction is added. Okay, so this is likely very confusing, but just bear with me. I'm going to take a drink of water, and I will explain it a little bit better. Or at least a little bit more. All right, so solving this hash problem, it takes a lot of computing power because solving it essentially means the computer has to input random numbers one after the other into the hash function to try and get the output of that hash function to be less than a certain value. And this is really difficult because hash functions have very random results that are difficult, if not impossible, to predict. So the computing power thing that I talked about, it's really important because when a new person joins the blockchain, they're going to need a copy of the current blockchain in order to start adding transactions. So they're going to need to know, okay, what's the status of the current blockchain, because I have to start adding to it. So chances are there are many different versions of the blockchain, so they need to know which one is correct. Okay, so hash function, in case that's kind of unclear, it's fine. It's just like any other function. So I don't know, in math class, if you learned about the function for finding the slope of a line, I don't know, like y equals mx plus b, that would be, y would be the hash, then mx plus b would be the hash value, y would be the hash value, mx plus b would be the hash function. So that's kind of what I mean by that. If that clarifies it at all. Maybe not, but hopefully that helped. Okay, so there's many different versions of the blockchain. When a new user wants to get a part of this, they have to know what the current status of the blockchain is. So how do they know? How do they know which one's correct? Well, I think a good rule of thumb would be to use the version of the blockchain which is the most common on the network, whichever one the most computers think is correct, right? So the issue with this is that when the quote-unquote vote is held on which version is correct, what's really stopping one computer from just voting a bunch for his or her own version and then skewing the vote towards a faulty blockchain? Well, the blockchain requires the solving of the hashing problem that we just talked about in order to be allowed to vote on their version of the blockchain. So what this means is that in order to successfully spoof your own version of the blockchain, you would effectively need to own over half of the computing power on the entire networks, which is it's such a ridiculous amount of money that you need to spend for that. It's not really it'd be cheaper to not do that than to try and spoof everybody's Bitcoin, right? So that's kind of where it gets its security. So each computer is kind of in a race to solve the next chain of the next transaction that's going to be put on the blockchain. A race to solve this hash function. And when they solve it, they can say, hey, this is the correct version, this is the correct version, right? So that's your vote. So when does this voting occur? Well, it occurs when new transactions are added, because the hash function requires using the last transaction on that computer's version of the blockchain. This guarantees that people who vote for the same new transaction also have the same order from the previous time, right? So also, since the process has been happening every time a new transaction is added, we can actually extrapolate that backwards and know that everyone's blockchain is consistent. So basically how this works is that in order to generate this hash value, you have to use the most recent transaction on the blockchain at that point. So this transaction's on the blockchain, and so you're going to take the new transaction that you want to put on the blockchain and the most recent transaction, put them into a hash function, and try and get the correct answer. So if you get that, then it's assumed that your version is correct. But since that's been happening since that presumably happened for that previous transaction, and for that previous transaction, and the previous transaction, and the previous transaction, all the way back to the very first transaction that ever happened, it's assumed that that would mean that everyone's blockchain is consistent. It's just a recursive function that keeps happening. And if you don't know what a recursive function is, just Google it, because that's kind of how I teach. So yeah, this is all well and good, right? But there's also another issue. How do we get people to volunteer to use their computing power to solve these problems, right? Obviously, we'd need to make it worth their while, because it's a lot of computing power, which is very expensive. I actually just listened to a project that somebody did where he implemented his own Bitcoin miner, and I think he mined Bitcoin for 2 days straight on his computer and made like 70 cents. And it was, it seemed kind of not worth your while, just considering power and everything. So this is actually where Bitcoin mining comes in. So have you ever heard the term Bitcoin miners? This is what they do. So every time you successfully solve one of these hash problems, solve one of them first, I should say. So you get your vote out first. There's going to be new Bitcoins created, and they're given to you on your account. So this is going to give a lot of incentive, right, to miners to keep using their computing power to keep the blockchain in the correct order. So it can be very lucrative if you have a good system set up. But there is only a limited amount of Bitcoin that can be created. Like, this is built into the mathematical algorithm. So in the Bitcoin generation algorithm, there can only be 21 million Bitcoins ever created, because the number of Bitcoins awarded for mining decreases as more Bitcoins are mined. So this is actually built right into the algorithm. So it's mathematically impossible. So because these hash problems are solved at a rate of about once every 10 minutes, the best estimates are that all new Bitcoins are going to be mined by the year 2140. It's pretty cool. So we got a bit before all 21 million are out there, but they're going down. The amount that the reward is decreasing. I think it used to get 50 when you did it, and now then it went down to 25, and then I think it just kept cutting in half. And so there are things you can do to make Bitcoins unspendable, and it's possible also to lose them. So the actual number of Bitcoins by the year 2140 is likely going to be lower than 21 million. So yeah, I know that's a lot to take in all at once, and I'm going to take one more drink of water. So like I said, that's a lot to take in all at once, so feel free to listen as much as you need in order to understand it. There's also a lot of good YouTube videos on it if you're more of a visual learner. I'm not really sure I understood it the first time I read about it, and I was even doing a research paper on it. I feel like I understand it much better now. So I'm not here to really tell you whether or not Bitcoin is a good investment for you or not. Like, I wouldn't even know where to begin for that. The market seems to be irrationally high at this point, so I probably wouldn't get in it now, but that's just me. I don't know anything about investing, so, if you think it's good for you, go for it. But I hope that now that you understand the technology a little bit better, you're going to feel more confident in your investment choices. You at least understand why it has value and why people think, the way they do about it. And so my part's done. And I will link to the original white paper that outlined the Bitcoin protocol if you're interested. It's only 9 pages, but there's like a bunch of math, and it's kind of confusing if you don't really like that stuff. It was written by a guy named Satoshi Nakamoto. And I guess that's another concern people have is, who owns Bitcoin? Well, nobody does. This guy just created this algorithm, and the way that he built the algorithm, he can't really own it. I think he has some Bitcoins, but to be honest, we don't even know who it is because it was a pseudonym, so we don't know who he is, but God bless Satoshi Nakamoto. But yeah, so he doesn't control it or anything. It is decentralized. It doesn't have any one control. But yeah, the cool thing, I think, though, rather than Bitcoin, I mean, Bitcoin's cool, but the blockchain technology that we just talked about, that's the real cool thing about Bitcoin, because that actually has a lot of other applications that people are using. Just the idea that we can decentralize all these things that we thought were actually, that had to be going through a third party, we're able to just use them as decentralized technologies. And so that's kind of cool. And so I'm interested to see where that goes. And so that's the best way to explain Bitcoin, I think. Hopefully that helps out for any of you that were a little bit confused about what it was and how it works. And feel free to send any questions to me if you want to talk about it more. Scott@thebestwaytoexplainit.com. You can just send me an email along with your iTunes review and screenshot and rating for the Amazon Echo, which is going to be given out on Monday. Well, we're going to announce the winner on Monday. I don't know when they'll get it. But yeah, you guys really need to get in on that, all right? Yeah, I emphasize that enough, okay? Get in on this. It's cool. Like, you're going to help us out, and you might win an Amazon Echo for free. Don't even have to pay for shipping, so you're welcome. All right, so hopefully Breckan's going to be back next time. I'm not sure what he's talking about, but we have some really cool shows coming up. And thanks for sticking with us, and I'll talk to you guys next time. And what does Breckan say? Get learning? Okay, sure. Get learning.